Let me tell you something that took me a minute to actually process. Right now, as of early 2026, there is one human being on this planet who is worth somewhere between $400 and $839 billion, depending on which financial index you trust. Either way, that's a number so big, it stops being money and starts being a concept. We're talking about a single person whose fortune approaches the combined wealth of the next 4 richest people on Earth. Countries like Sweden and Poland run entire national economies on less than what this man is personally worth. His name is Elon Musk, and he is, by every credible measure, the wealthiest individual in recorded human history. But here's the thing that actually broke my brain. It's not even the number itself. It's the speed. From October 2025 to February 2026, just 4 months. His net worth jumped from $500 billion to $800 billion. $300 billion in 4 months. To put that in perspective, climbing his previous $100 billion took him 37 months. Now he's adding that in weeks. There were single days in there where his fortune moved by tens of billions. In a single day. I lose $7 on a bad lunch, and I think about it for the rest of the week. And because you might think, okay, fine, he's just a rich guy sitting on a pile of money doing nothing. Let me give you one statistic that reframes the entire picture. In 2025, his rocket company SpaceX launched 165 orbital missions. That's roughly 1 launch every other day. That single private company, not a government, not NASA, not a superpower, accounted for about 85% of all US orbital launches. And for some extra context, that cadence was nearly double China's entire national launch total for the year. One company, 1 year, more rockets than a nation of 1.4 billion people. Now, here is where the story gets genuinely interesting. Because this is not a straightforward world's greatest winner story. Not even close. The same year, Elon Musk became the richest human who ever lived. His flagship car company, Tesla, posted its 2nd straight year of declining sales. They moved 1.64 million vehicles, down roughly 9%, and were overtaken as the world's #1 EV brand by Chinese automaker BYD, who sold 2.26 million. The crown Tesla spent a decade building, gone. So let's sit with that for a second. The man is getting richer faster than any human being in history. His rockets are outperforming entire nations, and his most famous company is simultaneously losing market share and being dethroned by a competitor. How does that happen? How does someone break every wealth record ever recorded while also watching their core business shrink? That is the question. And the answer is one of the most genuinely complicated, impossible to look away from stories in modern history. So let's go back to the beginning. Because here's what most people get wrong about Elon Musk. They picture the origin story as some kind of gifted kid in a nice house, tinkering with computers, destiny basically preloaded. A born genius on a smooth runway to greatness. And I get why. When someone ends up that rich, the brain wants to retrofit a clean, heroic backstory onto it. The reality was considerably darker. Elon Musk was born on June 28, 1971, in Pretoria, South Africa, during apartheid. His parents divorced when he was around 8 years old, and at 10, he made the decision to go live with his father. He later described that choice as one of the biggest mistakes of his life. His mother May and his brother Kimball have both spoken publicly about their father being emotionally and physically abusive. This was not a warm, stable household he was growing up in, and school wasn't exactly a refuge either. The bullying Musk experienced as a kid wasn't the garden variety, kids can be cruel stuff. It was violent. He was once beaten so badly that he was thrown down a flight of stairs and knocked unconscious, badly enough to be hospitalized. He has said, in his own words, that he was almost beaten to death. As a child, the guy who would one day build the most prolific rocket program in history spent part of his childhood just trying to survive the school week. But somewhere inside all of that, the instability at home, the violence at school, this kid found computers. By age 10, he was teaching himself to program. By age 12, in 1984, he had written a fully functional space-themed video game in BASIC called Blastar and sold it to a tech magazine for around $500. 12 years old. Coded a game. Sold it. Meanwhile, at 12, I was deeply focused on figuring out how to get the TV remote without getting up from the couch. Different paths. At 17, he made another move that tells you everything about how his mind works. He left South Africa, alone, emigrated to Canada, partly to dodge the mandatory military service requirement back home, and eventually transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, where he studied physics and economics simultaneously, because apparently one degree felt too relaxed. Then came the first real chapter of his business life, and the first real gut punch. In 1999, he co-founded an online financial company called X.com. It merged with a competitor called Confinity in 2000, and that combined company became PayPal. You've heard of it. And just as things were taking off, while Musk was literally on his honeymoon, the board voted him out as CEO and replaced him with Peter Thiel. On his honeymoon. Now, most people would find that experience so personally devastating, they'd spend the next decade nursing a grudge. Musk stayed in as the largest shareholder. And when eBay bought PayPal for $1.5 billion in 2002, his cut came out to roughly $165 to $180 million. A few years earlier, his first company, Zip2, had sold to Compaq for $307 million, netting him about $22 million from his 7% stake. So by his early 30s, he had real money. And the absolutely rational, sensible thing to do with it was put almost all of it into two industries that had never produced a successful startup. Ever. Rockets and electric cars. His friends reportedly begged him not to. Serious, knowledgeable people told him both companies would fail. And honestly, for a while, they were right. 2008 was the year it all nearly collapsed at once. SpaceX had now attempted 3 launches of its Falcon 1 rocket. 3 attempts, 3 failures, each one burning through money that was running out fast. Musk has said he put in his last money. He didn't own a house. He was borrowing cash from friends to pay rent. The man who would one day be worth $800 billion was, in 2008, personally broke and couch surfing. And then, on September 28, 2008, the 4th Falcon 1 launched, and it reached orbit. The first privately funded liquid-fueled rocket in human history to make it there. One more failure, and SpaceX was finished. One more failure, and this whole story ends in 2008 with a Wikipedia footnote about a South African entrepreneur who tried and lost. But that's not even the full picture of that year, because Tesla, simultaneously, was 3 days from bankruptcy. 3 days. A last-minute rescue round of $40 million closed at 6 p.m. on Christmas Eve, December 24th, 2008. Not December 23rd, not the 26th. Christmas Eve, 6 in the evening. You want to talk about cutting it close? That man spent Christmas 2008 knowing that 12 hours earlier, everything he had built could have been gone. And he didn't just survive it. He walked straight into the next decade and built the largest private space program in human history. So he survived 2008. Barely. And what did he do with that survival? He went on the most sustained, relentless, empire-building run that the business world has arguably ever seen. And to really appreciate the scale of what got built, we need to go back just slightly to where the rocket obsession actually came from. Because it's a better story than most people know. In 2001 and 2002, before SpaceX even existed, Musk had this idea, a publicity stunt really, to land a small greenhouse on Mars, just to capture the world's imagination. So he flew to Russia to try and buy some refurbished intercontinental ballistic missiles to use as launch vehicles, which is, by the way, a completely normal thing to do on a Tuesday. The Russians were not impressed. They reportedly laughed at him, sent him home empty-handed, and on the flight back, somewhere over the Atlantic, presumably still a little embarrassed, Musk opened a spreadsheet and started calculating the actual raw material costs of building a rocket from scratch. And the number he got back was staggering, in the opposite direction. The materials were a tiny fraction of what rockets actually cost to buy. The rest was markup, monopoly, and institutional inefficiency. So he landed and decided to build the rockets himself. That was 2002. SpaceX was born. 2 years later, in 2004, he invested in a tiny electric car startup called Tesla, founded the previous year by Martin Eberhard and Mark Tarpenning, and gradually took over leadership, becoming CEO in October 2008. The same October, by the way, that everything was on fire. Multitasking at a level that makes most of us feel genuinely inadequate. Then came the NASA lifeline. Fresh off the fourth Falcon 1 success, SpaceX landed a cargo contract with NASA worth roughly $1.6 billion. That was the oxygen that let the company breathe and scale. And scale it did. By 2015, Musk had co-founded OpenAI alongside a group of researchers, pledging around $1 billion toward building safe artificial intelligence. He'd later leave the board in 2018 after reportedly pushing for control and being turned down. And then, years later, he became one of OpenAI's loudest public critics, before launching his own AI company, xAI, in 2023. Because if you can't join them, apparently, you build a competitor and then merge it with your rocket company for $1.25 trillion. But we'll get to that. Back to the scoreboard, because the scoreboard is something else. Tesla's Model 3 scaled in 2018 after what Musk himself called production hell, a period of manufacturing chaos that he powered through by sleeping on the factory floor. By 2021, Tesla hit a $1 trillion market cap, becoming only the 6th US company in history to ever reach that threshold. In 2022, he bought Twitter for $44 billion, a purchase that the entire internet had opinions about, and renamed it X in 2023. By 2025, SpaceX was logging records that don't even sound real. The 600th Falcon booster landing, the 500th flight using a reused booster, over 10,000 Starlink satellites launched, with around 9,300 active, serving millions of subscribers globally. And then those 165 orbital missions in a single year, the number we opened with, cementing SpaceX not just as a company, but as the dominant force in the entire history of spaceflight. And in February 2026, SpaceX absorbed his AI company xAI in a deal reportedly worth $1.25 trillion, described as the largest corporate merger ever recorded, with an IPO targeting a valuation of up to $1.5 trillion. From "I'd like to buy some Russian missiles, please," to the largest merger in human history. in roughly 25 years. Now here's the part I find the most fascinating. Because once you see the how behind all of this, the results stop feeling like magic and start feeling like a very specific, very intense, and honestly very brutal operating system running on a human being. It starts with the Russia trip. That moment, being laughed out of a room because rockets were absurdly overpriced, planted a seed that became SpaceX's entire founding philosophy. Build everything in-house, cut out every middleman, and obsess over cost like your life depends on it. Because in 2008, it literally did. And that philosophy produced reusability. The idea that a rocket booster, something that used to be a single-use, $100 million piece of hardware you watched fall into the ocean, could land itself back on a pad and fly again, and again, and again, 600 times and counting. That one engineering obsession is the structural reason a private company now outlaunches entire national space programs. It's not magic, it's just not throwing the rocket away. Then there's the labor doctrine. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because it's real and it matters. During Tesla's 2018 production crisis, the Model 3 production hell, Musk was sleeping on the factory floor and publicly describing his work weeks as 120 hours. 120 hours. There are only 168 hours in a week, so that leaves 48 hours for everything else. Sleep, food, existing as a human. He has consistently demanded a version of that intensity from the people around him, building companies that run, by design, at the edge of what's considered survivable. Most of us debate whether to reply to a work email after 6 p.m. Different standard. Then there's what I'd call capital brinkmanship. The pattern of betting everything repeatedly, with no safety net by choice. The fourth Falcon one funded with his last dollar. The Christmas Eve Tesla round funded the same way. Later, the $44 billion Twitter acquisition. The $1.25 trillion XAI merger. Each time, the scale grows. Each time, the all-in logic is the same. Conventional caution produces conventional results, and conventional results don't get you to Mars. He also uses X, the platform he owns, as both a megaphone and a lever. His posts have moved stock markets, they've swung cryptocurrency prices, they've influenced elections. That kind of reach is a force multiplier, unlike anything a CEO has ever had access to before. Though, as we'll see in a moment, that weapon cuts in every direction, including backwards. And finally, the forcing function of impossible timelines. Musk has a habit of publicly committing to deadlines that serious, experienced people consider delusional. Full self-driving by a certain year. 1 million people on Mars by a certain decade. Production targets that make engineers visibly uncomfortable. The method seems to be: state the impossible publicly, make retreat embarrassing, and let the pressure do the work. It doesn't always hit the deadline, but it often moves further than staying quiet would have. Oh, and one more thing he's been unusually candid about. In 2021, on Saturday Night Live of all places, Musk publicly disclosed that he has Asperger's syndrome. He's talked about it as the source of his single-minded, almost tunnel vision focus. The ability to lock onto a problem and not let go until it breaks. The same trait that made childhood socially brutal, apparently became the engine. That's the operating system. Vertical integration, cost obsession, punishing labor standards, all-in capital risk, platform leverage, impossible timelines, and a brain that doesn't easily look away. It's not a secret formula. It's just one that very few people would actually choose to run. So now we have the full picture of the climb. The origins, the near collapses, the method, the empire. And this is the part of the story where most biographical videos make a choice. They either go full celebration, visionary genius, change the world, end credits, or they go full takedown, dangerous billionaire, cautionary tale, subscribe for more outrage. We're not doing either. Because the honest version of this story is messier, more interesting, and frankly more respectful of your intelligence than either of those. So let's talk about what Elon Musk actually built, what he actually promised, and where the gap between those two things lives. Start with aerospace, because here the legacy is almost impossible to argue with. For decades, the US launch industry was effectively a two-company monopoly. Boeing and Lockheed, operating together under a joint venture called United Launch Alliance. Government contracts, guaranteed revenue, no real competitive pressure, and prices to match. SpaceX walked in, built reusable rockets from scratch, and methodically dismantled that entire structure. By 2025, a single private company was flying roughly 85% of all US orbital launches. Not because the government handed SpaceX the market, but because SpaceX made launching things to orbit cheaper and more reliable than the entrenched players who'd been doing it for 50 years. That is a generational industrial achievement. Full stop. But now let's talk about Tesla, because this one is more complicated and more personal. At its peak, Tesla didn't just build electric cars. It created the modern EV industry. It proved that electric vehicles could be desirable, fast, and aspirational, rather than just environmentally correct. Every major automaker scrambling to electrify their lineup over the past decade did so, at least partly, because Tesla made them feel left behind. That's real, lasting influence, regardless of what the sales charts say today. But here's what happened to those sales charts. In 2025, Tesla deliveries dropped roughly 9% to 1.64 million vehicles, the second consecutive annual decline. And for the first time, a competitor, Chinese automaker BYD, overtook Tesla as the world's top EV seller, moving 2.26 million vehicles. The crown Tesla spent a decade building, gone. And here's the part that makes this genuinely fascinating from a business history perspective. The decline wasn't primarily technological. It wasn't that Tesla suddenly made worse cars. A significant portion of analysts and observers pointed directly at Musk's own public behavior as a drag on the brand. His political positioning, his increasingly polarizing presence on X, his role in the US government. Surveys showed measurable brand damage in key markets. Showrooms in multiple countries faced protests. Elon Musk may be the first person in history to demonstrably hurt his own multi-hundred-billion-dollar company through his own social media activity. The man who understood better than anyone how to use a platform as a lever accidentally used it on himself. Then there's DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. And this one requires some careful accounting. When Musk joined the Trump administration on Inauguration Day 2025 as a special government employee, a role with a 130-day legal cap, the stated ambition was extraordinary. $2 trillion in government savings. That was the campaign number. It got revised down to $1 trillion, then to $150 billion. DOGE's own website eventually claimed savings of somewhere between $175 and $214 billion, though multiple independent outlets found those figures to be significantly inflated, with numbers that were quietly rewritten or miscategorized. And the total federal spending in 2025, it actually went up. Now, to be fair, cutting government spending is genuinely one of the hardest things anyone can attempt in Washington. Bureaucracies don't shrink easily. Every line item has a constituency. The structural obstacles are real, and getting anything measurable done in 130 days is a legitimately difficult ask. But the gap between $2 trillion promised and the actual outcome is roughly 93%. and the human cost of some of the cuts drew serious scrutiny. The near shutdown of USAID, an agency that funds global health programs, drew estimates from public health researchers suggesting the disruption could be linked to hundreds of thousands of excess deaths in vulnerable populations. By late 2025, DOGE had been effectively wound down, and by the end of May 2025, Musk had departed. Following a very public falling out with President Trump over a spending bill Musk opposed and Trump signed anyway. The world's richest man, fired again, this time by the president. There is something almost cosmically consistent about that. And then there's the market manipulation question, which is not a conspiracy theory, it's a matter of public legal record. On August 7th, 2018, Musk tweeted, and I want to be precise here, am considering taking Tesla private at $420. Funding secured. Tesla's stock immediately surged. The SEC investigated and concluded the tweet was false. The $420 share price, Musk later admitted, was chosen as a cannabis joke. The funding secured part was, at best, aspirational. The result: Musk and Tesla each paid $20 million in fines. Musk lost the Tesla chairmanship for 3 years and was placed under a rule requiring pre-approval of certain tweets. A tweet that cost him $20 million and his chairmanship. Because of a weed joke embedded in a securities filing. Beyond Tesla, his posts have visibly swung cryptocurrency markets, Dogecoin being the most documented example, raising ongoing questions about the responsibilities that come with having 200 million followers and a habit of posting financial commentary at 2 a.m. And finally, and this one is worth mentioning because Musk himself has made it central to his stated worldview, there's the demographics piece. He has been publicly and repeatedly vocal about what he sees as a civilizational threat: collapsing birth rates in developed countries. He frames this as one of the most urgent problems facing humanity. And he has personally engaged with the issue. He has at least 14 children across 4 mothers, a number he has discussed openly, and that he has reportedly framed in terms of setting an example. Whatever your view on the politics of that, and people have very strong ones, it is worth noting that he is someone who, consistently, takes his stated beliefs and acts on them at a scale that most people find either inspiring or alarming, with very little middle ground. That pattern, massive belief, massive action, massive consequences, not all of them intended, is really the through line of the whole story. So where does that leave us? Record-breaking rocket program, real. Transforming the EV industry, real. DOGE savings falling 93% short of the promise, also real. Tesla losing its global crown partly because of his own choices, also real. The SEC fraud settlement, documented. The largest merger in human history, just announced. All of it, simultaneously, the same person. So here we are. We started with a number so large it barely functions as a number anymore. The richest human being who has ever lived, by any measure, in all of recorded history. And we've spent this whole story trying to actually understand what that means. Where it came from, what it cost, what it built, and what it broke along the way. Let me just lay it all out on the table one final time. Because held together, it's genuinely one of the strangest portraits of a human being you will ever encounter. The same man who was beaten unconscious as a child in South Africa built the most prolific rocket program in the history of spaceflight. The same man who was pushed out as CEO while on his honeymoon went on to run 5 major companies simultaneously. The same man who was personally broke and borrowing money from friends at 37 became worth $800 billion by 54. The same man whose fourth rocket succeeded by the skin of its teeth on a last dollar bet now launches one every other day like it's a commuter schedule. And the same man who reached the absolute pinnacle of wealth watched his most famous company get dethroned the same year he got there. You genuinely could not write this character. An editor would send it back. But here's the question I keep coming back to. The one I think is actually worth sitting with. Musk's stated justification for all of it. The brutal labor, the broken promises, the political chaos, the all-in bets, the 14 children, the government role, the trillion-dollar mergers, is remarkably consistent. It all points, in his telling, toward one thing: the long-term survival of civilization. Mars colonization as a backup for humanity, sustainable energy to buy the planet time, birth rates as an existential signal, free speech as a civilizational foundation. Whether you believe him or not, and reasonable, intelligent people land on completely different sides of that, the method he uses to pursue those goals is inseparable from the results it produces. The same all-in recklessness that saved SpaceX on Christmas Eve 2008 is the same recklessness that produced a 93% shortfall on a government efficiency pledge. The same platform power that accelerated Tesla into a trillion-dollar company is the same platform power that may have helped drive it back down. The same tunnel vision focus that gets rockets to orbit is the same tunnel vision focus that made childhood brutal and made boardrooms uncomfortable and made governments nervous. You cannot surgically extract the breakthroughs from the operating system that produced them. They come as a package, and that's the question I'll leave you with. Not, is Elon Musk good or bad? Because that's a bumper sticker, and you deserve better than a bumper sticker. The real question is this: when one person concentrates that much capital, that much reach, that much rocket fuel, and that much conviction about what civilization needs, all inside a single, admittedly extraordinary, admittedly flawed human being, is that a feature of the world we want to live in? Or is it a bug? Because the answer you give to that question says something not just about how you see Elon Musk, but about how you see power, progress, and the kind of future you think humanity actually deserves. Think about it. And if this story made you see something differently, whether it confirmed what you already believed, complicated it, or cracked it open entirely, drop it in the comments. Because the most interesting conversations don't happen when everyone agrees. They happen when the story is genuinely too big to fit inside a single opinion. And this one definitely qualifies.